All right, if you'd like to read this article, you can go to justinstellman.com/A19. 12 reasons I stopped going to church. For those of you who will immediately write off this article, I would like you to hear me out. First of all, any Christian who reads this is going to think two things before they even read all 12 reasons I no longer attend church. They're going to think I'm living in sin and I don't want to go to church because my secret sin will be exposed. I can say that is not true. I don't have any secret sins other than just normal sin that we all commit on a daily basis. The other thing Christians are going to think is that I've hardened my heart and I've walked away from God. I can assure you this is also not the case. In fact, by not attending church on a regular basis for the past 7 years, I feel closer to God now than ever before. All right, a little backstory. When I was about 8 or so, I remember going to a Baptist church every Sunday. I never really liked it. I can't think of any 8-year-old that would enjoy going to church. My parents started going because they wanted to make sure that I had made good friends and didn't start associating myself with the bad kids at school. And that's an honorable reason, I think. But I didn't enjoy it at all. I could hardly wait for it to be over so I can go home and skate with my friends. Then around age 15, I, quote, became a Christian while attending a public high school. My brother decided to go to a Christian high school, so I figured becoming a Christian was the cool thing to do, so I followed his lead. Around the same time, I was heavily involved in our high school basketball program. My hope was to get a scholarship to a college and then see how far I could take my basketball career. Now, looking back, I should have realized a 6-foot white kid wasn't going to go too far. But when I was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy as a sophomore in high school, my career was essentially over. I guess I wasn't going to be starting guard for the Los Angeles Lakers after all. Since playing basketball was over, I had no real reason to stay at the school I was attending, so why not change? So I decided to attend Calvary Chapel of Costa Mesa High School, just like my brother did. My whole world changed. I was suddenly thrown into this weird Christian world, and yet I seemed to like it. I was no longer the weird Christian kid in public school, so I seemed to fit right in. As I began to immerse myself in the Calvary Chapel doctrine, I found myself attending church maybe 3 or 4 times a week at the beginning, but it quickly turned into more than 3 times a week. I remember we had chapel as a school every Monday morning. Then we had a midweek high school Bible study on Wednesday nights at 7:30 p.m. I'd also attend a Friday night home fellowship. Christian words are so funny, right? Fellowship. And on top of that, I'd attend Sunday morning Bible studies. There was a high school study while the adults were in the main sanctuary. Then after the high school study was over, most likely I would attend adult church service as well. I can recall we'd also make the 30-minute drive on Sunday nights as well as a 7 p.m. verse-by-verse study of the Bible. On top of all this, I had classes that were Bible classes during the week as part of my Christian, quote, education at my high school. I'd even attend a midweek lunchtime Bible study that took place at the high school library. So now that I think about it, that was about 7 or 8 Bible studies per week. That also didn't count listening to tapes going through the entire Bible with Pastor Chuck Smith, which I did twice. And when I wasn't listening to tapes going verse by verse through the Bible, I listened to Walter Martin, a.k.a. the Bible Answer Man, and Christian radio while I was driving to and from all of these wonderful Bible studies. I just couldn't get enough. I was balls deep and fully immersed in this new world I chose for myself. The funny thing was that nobody was making me do any of this. And to add insult to injury, I also taught Bible studies on public school campuses once per week during my entire senior year of high school. I know, what were they thinking? I kept all of this up during my junior and senior year of high school. When I graduated, I did what any logical, rational kid would do. I skipped going to college and decided to work for the church so I could further immerse myself in whatever the hell it was they were trying to teach me. I did this for about 3 more years before I finally just cut ties with Calvary Chapel. I did still attend church on a regular basis, but as the years went by, I became more and more awake. I've whittled my church attendance down to about once or twice a year. I didn't even factor into all of this the 2 missionary trips to Hungary and that took place for many months, as well as a trip to Mexico. Also, I go witnessing on Friday nights with my friends. I wanted to tell everybody about Jesus and what he did on the cross. I was quite the on-fire little evangelical whippersnapper in my day. The people that I went to school with most likely would label me as being a backslider, or i.e. somebody who has fallen away from the faith. But as I stated before, I've never had a closer walk with God than I do today, and I don't even attend church. A friend of mine on a similar journey always jokes, quote, "We've gone to enough church services to last a lifetime." Or sometimes when people would ask him where he's going to church, people always assume you never evolve, right? He cheekily replies, "I am the church," with a little smug little grin on his face. The person asking the question typically isn't amused at his sarcastic retort. According to a poll, a massive percentage of younger people are leaving the church in droves. It seems like masses of people feel the same way about it as I do. I think there's a few reasons for this. I think people are generally waking up and starting to see through much of what the church is about. I also think people are leaving the church because it's not really meeting their needs. They're realizing they can listen to sermons online and even watch them on Sunday mornings from the comfort of their own home. They can get their fellowship by meeting with family and friends who have similar outlooks on faith. Now, this is a real issue because as church attendance keeps falling, it's going to require pastors to actually go out and get regular jobs to pay their bills. Now, obviously, pastors must be fearful that this is happening. In response to their own fears, I would often hear more and more fear-based messages on Sunday mornings. There would be the sermon about how if you don't attend church, then God is constantly mad at you. And who wants the creator of the known universe to be mad at them? Then there's the token, you're going to go to hell card that's often pulled. I see this, and it's just very odd. Are pastors just afraid that they'll have to work at Walmart if everybody stops attending their Sunday morning sermons? Now, people in my life wonder why I don't go to church anymore. They don't really ask, but I know they're thinking about it and talking amongst themselves about whether or not I'm still a, quote, Christian. So for all of you that are wondering, here are 12 reasons. I'll give one reason for each of the tribes of Israel. How about that? That I don't attend church anymore. I don't find God there. This is probably the biggest reason I don't attend church. If you're a regular church-going Christian, you'll be thinking that I haven't tried enough churches, or you might be thinking I haven't found the right denomination of church. But here's what I can say to that. I've traveled all around the world, and in every country I made it a point to attend at least one, most of the time more, church service in every country. In Tonga, I attended multiple Mormon church services. In South Africa, I attended non-denominational church services. In Yugoslavia, I attended faith healing services. In Australia, I attended the Episcopalian and Pentecostal services. And here in America, I've been to Baptist, non-denominational, Jehovah's Witness, Catholic, Presbyterian churches, as well as many others. Let's just say I've experienced enough churches to satisfy my own requirements. I've never found God there. I've always wanted to. But I feel like Bono when he sings that famous line in his song, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, where he says, "I've climbed the highest mountains, I've run through the fields, only to be with you. I've run, I've crawled, I've scaled these city walls. Said it was only to be with you, but I still haven't found what I'm looking for. I gave it a good shot, and nobody can say that I didn't try. I really wanted to believe and wanted with all my heart to buy into it all, but I just couldn't. As I continued to grow spiritually outside of the church, emotionally and mentally, I would look into the eyes of regular attendees of churches and see fear. Everything they were doing and saying seemed to be based on fear. And I never saw God in any of it. I didn't see God in the lives of people who attended church or in how the church operated itself. People are fake. I noticed pretty early on a lot of fakery going on in the church. If you would ask other Christians how they were doing in their, quote, walk with God, I could tell they'd lie about it. Hell, I lied about it when people asked me. I distinctly remember a girl named Julie one day in high school at lunch asking me what God has been speaking to me about lately. It caught me off guard because although I was reading my Bible, praying every day, and attending church often, I didn't feel like God was really speaking anything to me. I guess I was in a bit of a dry spell with God. Maybe he was mad at me for some reason. I was 15 or so maybe he was upset I looked at a girl wrong or something. So I lied to Julie that day and made something up to make her feel happy. It was at that moment I realized how many other people must also be faking a lot of what they are trying to be. The more I woke up, I realized it was all happening all at the same time. I noticed people would rather tithe $20 on a Sunday morning rather than taking time to help a homeless guy when he's down and out. I didn't see really people investing in other people. There was a lot of lip service going on, and even as a teenager, I started to detect it. The inner workings were corrupt. As somebody who was on the inside of one of the largest churches in the United States of America, I saw a lot of politics. I saw a lot of people doing shady things. For example, my brother was a missionary of Calvary Chapel. He spent a year in Africa teaching the Bible after high school. He also spent 7 years in Hungary doing the same thing. When he was in Hungary, he was having some theological differences and going through a time of awakening himself. He was very upfront with the other pastors about this, and they told him, as long as he doesn't share what he's learning from the pulpit, he'd be fine. So one day, I sent a tithe check to him for support, and Calvary Chapel told me that my brother was no longer a missionary for them anymore. My jaw was on the floor. I was in complete shock. They had to be wrong about this, but sure enough, they were right. They never bothered to tell him, though. When I mentioned all this to my brother via email, that's how he found out they cut him from the missionary support and told him to pack his bags for home. He had essentially been fired, and they never even bothered to tell him. One pastor friend of mine bought a house, and the next week he was fired. The bizarre part about that story was the church knew he just purchased a home, and yet they still fired him. I've seen so much that even if I were an on-fire Christian, I'd never work for the church again. Once you see how it all works on the inside, it just kind of ruins it. The lack of conscious awareness, the general attitude of people that go to church, in my experience, was one that lacked any kind of awareness. So I'll share a couple examples. Every Sunday, I would notice that there would be free donuts and coffee provided after the service. Now, I couldn't help but think that these church people didn't understand health at all. These are very acidic-forming and acid-forming foods. If the body becomes too acidic, the proliferation of cancer cells could begin to exist. Then I would hear prayer requests about members of the church that have diabetes and heart conditions and cancer. I couldn't help but think that some of that could have been caused by the very foods they were eating at church. The Christian school I went to had vending machines full of sugary junk foods and had a cafeteria that provided all the cancer-causing foods your heart could imagine. Now, I don't understand why there's no awareness about health in that situation. Maybe you won't have to pray so much for God to heal people if you taught them how to eat right. The other example I'd like to make has to do with the environment. In the mind of most Christians, God gave us the earth to have dominion over. We took that to mean to rape and pillage. Why should we care about the earth if it's all just going to burn anyway? Now, I don't understand this logic at all, but if you were to be someone who wants to clean up planet Earth, you'd be labeled as a New Age hippie who's probably going to hell. Any organism that lacks conscious awareness is going to not only destroy their own body unknowingly, but also their environment. Being in a room full of people who thinks like this makes me feel really out of place. It isn't okay to be a Christian. Isn't it okay to be a Christian who wants to save the planet, or a Christian who cares about health rather than eat disease-forming foods and then rely on God to bail them out? I even see people like this blame God for not healing them. Now, to me, this just shows a complete lack of conscious awareness, and it doesn't make sense to me to spend time with people who have this distorted view of the world. Judgment. I realize that I'm being very subjective, and just because I've experienced these things while going to church doesn't mean that what I'm saying is right or you should follow what I'm saying. They're just my experiences. I found a lot of judgment when I was going to church. People would judge my walk with God almost on a daily basis. Pastors would judge girls at our school for wearing clothing that they thought was too revealing and question whether or not these girls were even, quote, saved. I know pastors who would not even buy apple juice at the supermarket just in case a church member would see them and think that it was beer. If you were too physical with your boyfriend or girlfriend, other church members would judge you and wonder why you're being a bad example to other people. If you listen to secular music, watch secular TV, or God forbid, You should read a classic book like Of Mice and Men where some swear words were in the dialogue. You would be judged very harshly. On top of all the judgment, I found there to be a lot of competition as to who could be and act the most spiritual. Like who reads the most chapters in the Bible or how long you pray each day were all areas where you could be judged. I knew I was being judged by other people and they would think that my walk with God was somehow less than theirs. As a result of that, I tried harder to do more things that made it look like I was more of a Christian. I started judging myself because I believed in all of their lies. After a certain amount of time, there's only so much judgment one can endure. It's really a sad place to be in, and I really feel for people still stuck in that kind of environment. If you feel like I'm describing you right now, the only way to reclaim your freedom is to cut ties and literally just not show up anymore. Let them judge you. At least you will not be near these people again. That's just what I did. I just stopped going to church and cut all ties with people that I felt were closed-minded. It was one of the best things I ever did. I have no idea where I'd be had I continued down that path. I can connect with God on my own. The longer you continue to make your world smaller by reading only Christian books, listening only to Christian radio, watching only Christian TV, associating only with Christian people, the more they will make you feel guilty for deciding to think for yourself on bigger issues. I finally realized that I can connect with God all on my own. When I first disconnected from the church, I would read my Bible at home and pray alone. I would spend time reading the Bible on Sunday mornings and felt completely fine by doing that. I no longer felt guilty for not wanting to shake some stranger's hand when the pastor told us to on Sunday mornings. I didn't feel myself feeling bad about only putting $20 in the offering plate instead of $30. I didn't feel guilty anymore because I simply wasn't in the environment where the guilt was taking place. See, our culture tries really hard to get us to believe in other people. We think doctors know more about our bodies than we do. We think teachers know more about our life than we ever could. We think lawyers know more about the law than we can. And sure, some of this is true, but even if every story in the Bible is 100% true and the only way to God is through Jesus, I still don't feel like I have to go to church and listen to a pastor in order to be more closely connected to my Creator. Dependency. As with any institution that seeks control of your mind and ultimately your life, there are benefits and privileges offered. They're not mandatory, but if accepted, they do come with a price. See, church creates an environment where you become dependent on others in order to be closer to God. With government, there are the benefits of a driver's license, using public roads, having a birth certificate, etc. In fact, the birth certificate allows us to do business in the public. It's our vehicle to operate as a publicly bonded corporation. The church also gives us benefits and privileges. You get to have the members of the church pray for you. Perhaps they can do a fundraiser if you don't have enough money to pay your medical bills. The problem is that if you're a regular member, you also get to be the receiver of the judgment of others. Oftentimes you get roped into commitments you don't have time for but feel guilty if you don't participate. You see, there's always a give and a take. They say that no man is an island, but personally I'd rather take my chances by not having to attend church. If I were ever in dire straits, I could always rely on myself first and as well as my family members and friends after that. It's not conducive to the maturation of an organism to have an unhealthy dependency on institutions to take care of your basic human needs. Now, granted, it's nice to have the help when you're in a pinch, but to live with that kind of dependent mindset for the long term is, in my opinion, not a healthy way to live. Not learning anything new or challenging. After having read the Bible twice from cover to cover on my own, as well as going through it verse by verse with the 5,000 series and the 7,000 series by Pastor Chuck Smith, I felt like I learned a lot. As I stated before, I also attended hundreds, if not thousands of hours of ancillary Bible studies. I will admit I'm not a biblical scholar by any means, but I know more than the average church attendee. Whenever I read passages in the Bible now, I have a million questions. I look at it in a whole new way. And when I would go to church near the end of my 5-year run, I would never hear any new insight on these seemingly contradictory or bizarre passages. It's almost as if the pastors would study from the same books before making an outline for their Sunday morning sermon. I'd hear the same highlights, the same stories, and all the same information week after week, year after year, and it wouldn't matter what church I attended. It was always the same stuff. Now, I'm somebody who always is looking for new, fresh insights, even on things I've read before. It just doesn't make sense to me anymore to keep going to a service where I would learn nothing and walk away with more questions than answers. Fear. From my experience, Christians are very scared people. I realize I'm making a huge blanket statement there, but in my experience, it's the truth. Other people are scared as well, but if there's a group of people who should be less scared, I would imagine it would be the Christians, right? Not only do I see fear in how people in the church think, but I notice it being a part of their weekly sermons. The people are afraid of what other people think about them. They're afraid of God himself. They're afraid of going to hell. They're afraid that if they don't save enough money from their jobs, God will not take care of them. They're afraid of dying. They're afraid of difficult situations, hence always praying to God that he will get them out of them. They're even afraid that they may not be a part of the rapture, even though the rapture concept is highly debatable even in certain Christian circles. Fear is just rampant. Fear also seems to be a major part of the weekly Sunday morning sermons. Pastors are preaching fear and making church members afraid of God and afraid of the church. I find them to be a very fearful group of people who pray like crazy for God to deliver them from pain, rather than giving them the strength and character to get through it. Mixing theology with world events. Even when I was in high school and I'd attend Bible studies, one of the biggest things that would perturb me was the preacher would end up talking about current events, or worse yet, politics. As we all know, we've been lied to in the media. The news isn't accurately and without bias reporting on events. The news isn't neutral. That's why you see so many Christians watching Fox News, while maybe atheists tend to prefer something like CNN. Here's an example of something that would drive me crazy. A preacher would use what we've been told apparently at Sandy Hook as a story to fluff up their sermon. Now, the preacher is just using that story to psychologically create rapport with the listeners in order to drive home a much deeper point. But the fact that the preacher didn't bother to do any research about a story like that makes me really unsure about whether or not I should listen to him about any other subjects as well. If he didn't bother to look deeper into any of these alleged stories he's sharing, well, it makes me think he bothered to do deep research into the Bible itself. It's also disturbing the amount of times I would hear a preacher talk about politics. I just shake my head. When pastors leave their area of expertise, I start to get a little bit nervous. See, pastors have no business talking about politics, especially when most of them have no clue about how things really work. The way I look at it is, if they are unfamiliar with topics like maritime admiralty, contract law, common law, private versus public, jurisdiction, 70-year debt cycles, they really have no business talking about whether or not we should vote Democrat or Republican. They're just misinformed and grossly uneducated about the topic. There are enough problems, even if you just stick with the religious topics. Please don't bite off more than you can chew. Money. You and I are both familiar with the faith healers, where preachers would tell people that if the church members would simply donate more money, God would heal them from a particular disease. This is absolutely disgusting, and it makes me sick to see these preachers lying in the name of God and, as Bono says, quote, stealing money from the sick and the old. Well, my God isn't short of cash, mister. When I was attending Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, I would regularly see Pastor Chuck Smith driving to church in his fancy little car. He had a nice home in Newport Beach. He was obviously doing very well, to the tune of what I've heard of bringing in about $1 million per Sunday morning. Now, I have no proof of that. That's just what I've heard. Now, I live in San Clemente, which can, in certain areas, be rather affluent. We definitely don't live in the rich area of town, but we routinely hear of local pastors moving to some of the wealthiest areas of town, all while continuing to get their parishioners to keep tithing each week. It doesn't make any sense to me for the rich guy standing at the pulpit to browbeating his poor listeners to give him more money. If I'm ever to tithe, I'll give it directly to a person I see that's in need. No need to have a third-party institution facilitate my transactions so they can use part of it for expanding their building fund. I can directly help somebody in need without intervention, which feels really good to me. I value my time. The older I get, and we don't even have kids yet, the more my time is precious to me. It can be challenging running a business and doing everything we're doing, along with making sure I take care of myself both physically and spiritually. There's not a lot of time left over to attend a service that's not really adding anything to my life. I don't see motivated people there who have stopped judging people. I don't see people there that have a strong inner spiritual practice. I don't see people who have let their own spiritual walk bleed into every other area of their lives. I see people filled with fear and judgment, and it usually starts from the pulpit. I don't see any value in spending time at a place that further facilitates fear, lack of spiritual growth, and dependency and judgment. There are so many different ways I could spend my time that would be much more beneficial to my growth as a human. Instead of going to church on Sundays and putting on a mask and acting fake, I can sit down with a great book. I can meditate. I can sit in my sauna at home and watch a documentary. I can have incredibly deep and inspiring conversations with Kate. Typically, these soul care practices leave me feeling much more connected, grounded, and motivated to love God more and help others along my own journey. I don't need to waste 3 or 4 hours each Sunday in order to accomplish the same thing I can do at home. Final conclusion. If you've made it this far, and I don't believe many hardcore Christians will have, and you're a Christian, you're probably thinking I've walked away from God and that I don't have a fire for God anywhere that burns bright in my soul. Or you're thinking I'm a backslider and have let Satan harden my heart to God's calling. I know all the language, aka the Christianese, pretty well. It's not that I want nothing to do with God or don't believe in him or her anymore. It's simply that I don't find that church is a place that helps me in any way. I don't feel challenged there. More than anything, I just feel judged. And this is what I'm walking away from, not God in the least bit. So if you'd like to comment on this and check out all the links that are in the article as well as any video